Hello moms, welcome to our March online Mom2Mom program. I'm so glad that you're tuning in and joining us. My name is Megan Miranda. I'm the Women's Ministry Director here at ABC Church, and I just want to say hello and welcome, and boy are you in for a treat. This month we have guest speaker Alice Witt joining us. And not only is Alice a member of our ABC family, but she's also a licensed clinical social worker and has been practicing for over 20 years. And she is going to be sharing with us today on conflict resolution. And so sit back and enjoy this time. We love you. We miss you. Please reach out with any questions that you have. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is megan@abcchurch.org, and you can also call the office. So would you join me in welcoming Alice? And I hope you have a fantastic time listening and learning and absorbing all it is that she's going to share with us today.
Hi, my name is Alice Witt. I'm in private practice in this area, providing counseling to individuals and couples. I've been married for 38 years. I have 5 adult children, one precious little 16-month-old granddaughter, and another on the way. I'm really honored to be here. My topic is conflict in marriage, but for single moms, this material is useful for you as well, as all relationships can have conflict. The tools we will be discussing can be used with your kids, your coworkers, your friends, other family members, neighbors. So please don't turn off just because we said this was about marriage. I have a disclaimer though. This information is not meant to address domestically violent conflict or issues involving characterological problems such as personality disorders. If that's your situation, please get some professional help. Also, in trying to prepare for this talk, I sort of felt like I was parking a Mack truck into a compact space. Megan last month said that she had, in thinking about her topic of marriage, had to rewrite it and really focus on simplicity. And I did that a number of times. I literally have binders at home from trainings I've done that are 3-4-inch thick binders on just conflict in marriage. So trying to figure out how to organize this and distill it so that it really was meaningful for all of you was really a task. And so my hope is that you won't listen to this whole talk and think, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. I'm just so overwhelmed. Please just listen and ask God to reveal to you maybe one thing that you can work on. Proverbs 17:14 says, "The beginning of strife is like letting out water. So quit before the quarrel breaks out." If it were only that easy that we could just stop, right? But unfortunately, that's not the case. And we can't live with another person and not have a complaint from time to time. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. All couples argue. It's how and when they repair that can really make the difference. In order to understand how to have a good fight, we have to understand what happens in a bad fight or an unhealthy fight. First, what is conflict? The dictionary definition is that it's a fight, a battle, or combat. I have a question for you. Is conflict bad? Do you feel like conflict is bad? Well, I used to, but the more I've worked with couples and the more I've struggled with conflict in my own life and in my marriage, the more I've come to understand that conflict can actually be a good thing. It can be good because you can learn more about yourself and it can actually draw you closer to the person with whom you have conflict. I've trained in and used Gottman couples counseling in my practice for years. Gottman couples counseling is the #1 evidence-based method for counseling couples. John and Julie Gottman created a love lab in Seattle. So John, both of them are PhDs in psychology. John focuses on research and Julie is a clinician. They created this love lab on Lake Union in Washington, or in Seattle, that is an apartment that has two-way mirrors, microphones, ways of recording, and generally places for researchers to observe. And this has been going on for over 30 years. So with the research that they've compiled, they have developed a method for counseling. And John says that within the first 90 seconds of watching a couple who are in the love lab, they're just interacting, they're not being told what to do, they just come and spend a couple nights in the love lab. They can predict with 90% accuracy whether the relationship is going to end. That's pretty astonishing. So what they have come up with is a metaphor for patterns of communication and conflict in marriage. And the first thing that has to happen in their couples counseling is to eliminate these 4 communication styles or patterns from a couple's communication. They've identified the 4 horsemen as a way to really classify the communication problems in marriage. By being able to identify the 4 horsemen in your conflict discussions, it's necessary first to eliminate them. But this knowledge is not enough. To drive away destructive communication patterns, we have to replace them with healthy, productive ones. You need to be brutally honest with yourself to look at your own patterns and not your spouse's. Your spouse most likely isn't even listening to this. So by changing your own behavior, you can help to change your spouse's behavior. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is a metaphor depicting the ends of time in the New Testament. They describe conquest, war, hunger, and death, respectively. But in counseling, we use them for a metaphor. And again, this metaphor can be used to accurately predict with 90% accuracy the end of a relationship. So I'm not going to go that dark, but this is the first step in counseling when I'm working with a couple, is to identify and eliminate the 4 horsemen, which are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. Psalm 139, 23 through 24 says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." So focus on your own behavior. Ask God to show you. Fortunately, each of the horsemen has a proven positive behavior that will counteract the negativity. Let's start with criticism. It is the deadliest of the 4 horsemen. Criticism is an utter failure at getting positive behavior change. Any short-term gain you might get from it builds resentment down the line. The way we are psychologically wired causes us to automatically defend when we are criticized. And so then we're going to have a downward spiral that looks like criticism, defensiveness, criticism, defensiveness, or it's your fault, no, it's your fault. And you're really not going to get anywhere. Criticism fails because it embodies 2 things that we really don't like. It calls for submission, and we don't like to submit. It devalues, and we really don't like being devalued. People actually like to cooperate. The valued person cooperates. The devalued person resists. If you want behavior change from a partner, child, relative, or friend, first slow down and show value for that person. If you want resistance, criticize. So what's the antidote to criticism? Well, before I said that we all have to be able to complain, so we have to learn how to complain about a behavior without criticizing it. The Gottmans call this a gentle startup, using I feel and I need statements. For example, you always talk about yourself. You are so selfish. Or, I'm feeling left out by our talk tonight. Would you please ask me about my day? Also, beware of interpretations that say, I feel like. Instead, or I feel like you aren't listening to me. Instead, use, I don't feel heard. James 1:20 says, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Critical people tend to also be angry. You're not going to get what it is that you want when you criticize. The second of the four horsemen is defensiveness. Partners who avoid defensiveness instead take responsibility for their role in the issue and express interest in their partner's feelings. They say, you're right. I could have been more aware of how exhausted you are. What you're saying really makes sense to me. Tell me more. Having knowledge that you have some role in the problem, you're accepting responsibility for it. And when you do this, you'll find that you can have real dialogue with your partner. You become a team working through an issue. Imagine conversations, arguments, fights that you have about conflict areas going differently. With less criticism and contempt and more understanding your partner's needs, expressing your needs in a healthy way, and taking responsibility for things that went wrong. Wouldn't that be great? So the antidote to defensiveness is ownership. By the way, explaining behavior is also defending. For example, it's not my fault that we're always late, it's yours. Or, well, yes, part of this is my problem. I need to think about how I use time a little more. Can you see the difference? Philippians 2:3-4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. Each of you should take not a look at your own interest, each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. The third horseman is contempt. Contempt I define as really teenage behaviors. If you have a teenager, or if you were one, you know what I'm talking about. Eye rolling, huffing and puffing, sighing, sarcasm. By the way, the word sarcasm in Greek actually means to tear flesh or to bite. I read one time that it meant flesh cutter. So I don't think we really want to do that to someone that we love. So the antidote to contempt really is to just stop it, to be aware of those behaviors and really try to stop. If you have a partner who does a lot of these things, just mark the behavior with an ouch and let them know that what they're doing hurts you. Stonewalling is the fourth and final one. And basically, stonewalling is shutting down in some way or other. Not talking, not engaging in the problem, walking away. State your intentions about walking away rather than just shutting down. You can say things like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can we take a break? And then actually go self-soothe and come back. That's the key. Actually, the two keys to the antidotes for stonewalling are to state your intentions to take a break and then to come back. If you don't come back, you're still stonewalling. So it's really important to make sure that you come back. But it's a very legitimate way to repair when an argument starts, to say, hey, I'm feeling flooded, or I've got a lot of feelings right now and I just need to take a break. Can we come back in 15 minutes? Or can we sleep on this and talk about it in the morning? And then you really do have to go work out your feelings. So recognizing the 4 horsemen may be a really good place for you to start. And if you recognize yourself in 1 or 2 of those behaviors, think about the antidotes that we talked about and just focus on that. But the next thing that we work on in counseling when there's a lot of conflict is to learn how to become a better listener. And when I say that, what I mean is I want you to really get to know your partner's heart. When you're a good listener, that's your focus. You're not listening so that you can find a loophole in their argument, or that you can ask a question to persuade them to see things your way. You're actually listening because you love this person you're talking to and you really want to understand them. And don't make the mistake of assuming that you already know or you've heard it before. Proverbs 2, 1 through 5 says, "If you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, and if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as if it were silver and search for it as if it were hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find not the knowledge of God." James 1:19, "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And then Proverbs 18:13 says, "He who answers before listening, this is to his folly and shame." Stephen Covey of the business world says, "Seek to understand before seeking to be understood." Here are 5 secrets to effective listening. These are also from the Gottmans. The first is a disarming technique. And if you remember back to when we were talking about defensiveness, this really applies there. But it's seek to find some truth in what the other person is saying, and even if it seems totally unreasonable or unfair to you, try to understand the one truth and go there and empathize with that. The second is empathy. Put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to see the world through their eyes. There are really 2 forms of empathy. One is feeling empathy, where you're trying to understand their feelings and you reflect back their feelings or you ask them what they felt. And the other is thought empathy. And this one kind of gets a bad rap now because the phrase, "so what I hear you saying is," has been way overused. But there are lots of ways that you can empathize with a person's thoughts, summarize what they were saying, ask some more questions to help them really understand that you are listening without using the phrase, "so what I hear you saying is." The third is my favorite, which is ask questions. Ask gentle, probing questions to learn more about what the other person is thinking and feeling. What I always say is get curious about this person that you love. And again, this could be a child. It doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be a friend. And the point here is that as you get curious, you're getting curious about this person that you love's heart, not trying to win a battle. When responding in your listening, again, use I feel statements. I feel statements can be, "I feel upset," rather than a you statement that says, "No, you're wrong," or "You're making me furious." You see the difference? If when you're listening and you're upset about what you're hearing, use an I statement. And then, of course, stroking. This goes back to the beginning when I was talking about criticism and how we all like to be valued. But as you're listening with someone, make sure you're letting them know that you value them. Find something genuinely positive to say to the other person, even in the heat of battle. Doing so can convey an attitude of respect, even though you may feel really angry with the other person. And just as an aside, appreciation and gratitude are really important. Your brain is always looking for things to support conclusions that you've come to. So if you are regularly practicing gratitude for the people in your life, what happens is when you do come into some kind of conflict, there's something called positive emotional override that happens. You might be really angry with your husband for maybe not doing the dishes, but then as you go away, you start thinking, but I can hear him reading to the kids, and he's a really good dad, and he's a good kisser, whatever. You quickly will go to the things that you appreciate, which will calm down your anger. Conversely, if what you're doing is rehearsing all the time the things about your spouse or loved one that frustrates you, when you do get into conflict, it's going to take longer to get over it because you've been rehearsing all these negative things. So that's just something to be aware of. Some resources to help with listening are, or actually the best resource to help with listening is the Comfort Circle, which you can find at howwelove.com. And it is a structured way of talking with the spouse where you take turns and you have a listener and a questioner. And by using their format, it forces you to listen and not respond. So that if you're having real problem with some conflict, that might be a useful tool. Again, that's the Comfort Circle at howwelove.com. So then the third step in couples counseling, when we're dealing with a high rate of conflict, is to understand what happens when a couple perceives a certain type of conflict as unsolvable. I'm not going to go into a lot of time about this, but there are areas of unsolvable conflict in most relationships. So I'm just going to kind of give you a quick little overview. Again, not to overwhelm you, but just to let you know that there is a process. So when you have unsolvable conflict, learn to compromise and cooperate. Figure out what are your flexible areas, what are your inflexible areas. You can say things like, help me to understand your inflexible areas. How do your core beliefs and values impact these areas? What do we agree about the most? What is our common goal? What feelings do we have that are in common? And how can we have both of our core needs met even if we're not going to do things exactly my way or your way? Again, I just want you to know that there is a process for unsolvable or seemingly unsolvable conflict. Some areas, they tend to be around finance. So say one of you thinks you should always buy a used car, and another one of you thinks that getting a new car is the way to go. I remember I had a friend who, this is kind of minor, but still it's one of those areas. They didn't like the same kind of movies. So the plan they came up with was just every other one. They would each watch the other person's type of movie. That way they were both getting an opportunity. They weren't 100% watching what one of them liked, but they compromised and started to enjoy each other's different type of movie. So I know that's an easy one, but I'm just showing you how that works. We also have to look at how do you repair once you've had a conflict. So I might teach couples how to deal with an aftermath of a fight using some formal redo process that would look like share your feelings about how you felt during the conflict without commenting on your partner's feelings. Describe your reality, take turns describing what happened for you, and as your partner is talking, summarize and validate. Figure out what your triggers are to conflict. And again, take responsibility for just your part of what you contributed to the argument, and then try to figure out what constructive plans. There's also informal redos, and this is something my husband and I have adopted. It works better for us. So we might have a little minor squabble or skirmish, and then sit down. Often it happens at dinner, and one of us will say, hey, you know, earlier when this happened, I'd kind of like to redo that. If I had a redo, I would have stated what I needed to you in this way. And then I might say, or he might say, well, yeah, I appreciate that. And I think I wish that I had responded this way and said these things. And the purpose for the redo is really you're retraining your brain. So it is an important step to, you know, once you have figured out that you can resolve conflict, you're not going to do it in a healthy way all the time. We certainly don't. So when we don't, we do the redo as a way of really reinforcing that we do know how to do it in a safe and healthy way. Again, I hope what you're hearing here is that this entire process is about focusing on yourself, what you can control in yourself, what you can change in yourself, never pointing out to the other person what they could be doing differently or better. Okay, a word about forgiveness. My husband and I separated for about a year, and it was during a time when some of our kids were in college and others in high school. Actually, I think our youngest one was left in high school. We had 5 children born, 4 of them in exactly 4 years. All 5 of them, it was 8 years. But the first 4 were born in exactly 5 years. So you can imagine that high school and college were a very stressful time. We often had 3 in college at a time, and 1 would graduate, and so this went on for about 8 years, really, where we had kids in college nonstop, and many overlapping. So it was a time of stress and really deep conflict. And one day my husband had kind of just topped out and left. So I was really angry, and we went through a year of almost not talking to each other. Then there came a point in time where I felt really convicted to invite him on a cruise. I don't know why a cruise, but I did not want to go on a cruise with him. I think I saw an advertisement for a steeply discounted cruise to Alaska, and I'd always wanted to do that. And so I had this distinct impression I was supposed to ask him to go on the cruise with me. But I didn't want to. So I floated the idea to a number of friends, and every one of them said, I wish I could, but not good timing, or I can't afford it right now, or whatever. So they all turned me down. And then one day he showed up at the house because he had to drop off some paperwork, and I was even really mad about what he was dropping off, so it was kind of steaming around, and I had this total weight on me of ask him, ask him, ask him. Well, I didn't, and he left, and I literally was glued to a spot. I knew I had to offer. So I sent him an email and said, do you want to go on an Alaskan cruise with me in July? This was probably the end of May. He immediately responded yes with exclamation points. And then 2 hours later, I received 24 long stem yellow roses with a note attached that said, thank you for showing me grace. And I literally collapsed to the floor and wept. And Colossians 3:12 through 17 came to mind. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one of us has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you. So you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called to be one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, and with thankfulness in your hearts. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father. And I realized that I had not been acting that out with him, and that I had been forgiven much, and I was holding back forgiveness. So I chose that day to begin to forgive. It doesn't mean that I didn't have boundaries and that we didn't have to work through some things, because we had a lot of things to work through, and I really had to learn how to have better boundaries. That was really my biggest part in the troubles in our marriage. So how do you go about forgiving when you have a lot of hurt feelings and you have past, and you have a past that even starts before your spouse enters the picture? Well, one thing that can help is to write down 3 ways that negative emotions have impacted you and are still impacting your marriage. I struggle with abandonment, and what I've figured out is that frequently when there is a strong feeling that I have in conflict with my husband, it has to do with feeling either emotionally abandoned or physically abandoned, but it's usually emotional abandonment. And there are lots of ways where that plays out. And it started with my family of origin. So lucky him, he gets the impact of that. But I have figured out ways of beginning to recognize that. So if I recognize that what's causing me to feel angry in any given moment has to do with abandonment, I really go work on it before I ever say anything to him. Because a lot of times it's not about him. Something he did just triggered a past emotion. Find a way to dislodge yourself from those negative emotions. So talk to a friend, do yoga, go for a walk, process through talk therapy. But find ways of working through those negative resentments. Resentments can build up when people just sweep them under the rug. So absolutely don't do that. But take small steps to repair and let go of grudges. I have a kind of a funny story, but my husband is a pediatric plastic surgeon. So he's smart and capable and has to be really good with his hands. But hanging up towels is not something he does very well. And we've tried all kinds of things. So here, hang it on a hook. He never drops it on the floor, but rarely is it folded in 3s and nicely draped over the rod like I like. So I can pick a fight about that and get mad, or I can just go, okay, this one is not so important. I'm not going to be mad about this. This really isn't about him not listening to me. It's about other things. So if I see it, I just go and I fix it because I'm the one who likes the towels hung up nicely. So that's a little example of, letting go of a grudge. And the way we deal with it so that I'm not mad is we tease about it all the time. So humor can be really helpful in repair. We use that a lot. We tease each other, not with contempt, but just, in a humorous way when we recognize that we're probably stepping on some toes. Accept responsibility for your part in the interaction. Boy, I think I've said that a whole lot in the last 45 minutes. One person's ability to do this can change the dynamic of a relationship. John and Julie Gottman explain that one person's response will literally change the brain waves of the other person's. You apologize to your partner when appropriate. This will validate their feelings, promote forgiveness, and allow you both to move on. Don't let wounds fester. Challenge your beliefs and self-defeating thoughts about holding on to hurt feelings. Processing what happened will allow you to let resentments go so that you're keeping short accounts, not long lists. I literally have a friend whose husband has over 100 offenses written down, and periodically he says, should we sit down and go through the list? I don't know how she does it, and I don't really feel like that's biblical. I feel like, there are things that you have to process through, ask each other forgiveness, and then move on. And don't use things from the past as a baseball bat. This is a good one. Accept that people do the best they can. I'm a big believer in research, and Brene Brown has some good research on the question, are people doing the best they can? And the outcomes of her study suggest that yes, most people are actually doing the best they can. It might not be up to your standard, but they're doing the best they can. The other thing is that I often say to couples that the biggest thing you have to forgive your spouse for is not being you. Think about that one for a little bit. Then think like a forgiving person. Practice forgiveness by actively thinking like a forgiving person. Avoid holding grudges and declare that you are free to stop playing the role of victim. After all, we are all imperfect and deserve compassion. Isn't that what Jesus has shown us? Practicing forgiveness will allow you to turn the corner from feeling like a victim to becoming a more empowered person. John and Julie Gottman believe that forgiveness can allow you to break the cycle of pain and move to a healthier life. Keep in mind that forgiveness takes time. It has a lot to do with letting go of things that you have no control over. Forgiveness is an intellectual choice that if you continually pray to feel the forgiveness that you've chosen to give, with that daily commitment, your heart will eventually follow. The lyrics to one of my favorite songs is by Matthew West. It's called Forgiveness. Listen to this. It's the hardest thing to give away and the last thing on your mind today. It always goes to those who don't deserve it. It's the opposite of how you feel when the pain they cause is just too real. It takes everything you have just to say the word, forgiveness. It flies in the face of all your pride. It moves away the mad inside. It's always anger's own worst enemy. Even when the jury and the judge say you've got a right to hold a grudge, it's the whisper in your ear saying, set it free. Forgiveness. Show me how to love the unlovable. Show me how to reach the unreachable. Help me now to do the impossible. Forgiveness. It'll clear away the bitterness, and it can even set a prisoner free. Thank you. I wanted to give you, just in conclusion, a few resources. So if you have a pencil handy nearby, there are 5 resources that could help with some of the things that I was talking about today. How We Love by Kay and Mylan Yurkovich, and it's at their website, How We Love, that you can find the Comfort Circle. And by the way, they also have a feeling words list that can be really helpful to help your whole family learn to develop a vocabulary for feeling words. Any books by John and Julie Gottman. Cloud and Townsend wrote a book, Boundaries in Marriage. That can be helpful. Sue Johnson is the creator of Emotionally Focused Therapy, which I have training in as well, and fits in with the Gottmans. In fact, in their couples and individual counseling program, they include emotionally focused therapy. She has 2 books, one called Created for Connection and another called Hold Me Tight. They essentially are the same material. Created for Connection has a more biblical bent. And then if you're struggling with what might be an emotionally destructive marriage, but you're not sure, Leslie Vernick, V-E-R-N-I-C-K, wrote a book called The Emotionally Destructive Marriage, which is really superb. It starts off with a quiz to help you recognize some unhealthy behaviors. And then her website, and she's got a Facebook page. She's a really good person to follow if that's a struggle that you're having. So thanks again for listening and for the invitation to come and speak to you today. And I hope to see you all in church.